Welcome to the Lend Academy podcast, episode number 118. This is your host, Peter Renton, founder of Lend Academy and co-founder of Lend It. Today's podcast is sponsored by Fundrise. Fundrise investors earned over 10.8% average annualized returns during the second quarter of 2017. That's approximately 50% higher than a typical diversified peer-to-peer lending portfolio. How? Fundrise is the first investment service that makes the benefits of private market real estate investing available to everyone online. You can begin with as little as $500. Go to www.fundrise.com/lendacademy to find out more. Today on the show, I'm delighted to welcome Misha Esipov. He is the CEO and co-founder of Nova Credit. Now, you might have heard of Nova Credit because they were the winner of the 2017 Pitch It at Lend It contest. They won both the Judges Award and the Audience Choice Awards, so they're obviously very popular at Lend It back in March. So I wanted to get Misha on the show. He has got a fascinating company, and it's something that I truly believe in the mission of what they're doing. So I want to get on the show, talk about how he's able to do something which is create an international credit bureau that it's never been done before. So I wanted to dig into that, talk about the challenges in really logistically pulling all that together, talk about the kind of lenders and customers that he's working with today, and what his visions are for the future. It really was a fascinating interview, and I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the podcast, Misha.
Great to be here, Peter.
Okay, so let's get started and give the listeners a little bit of background about yourself. Would like to hear a little bit about your immigrant story and also about what you've done in your career.
Sure, happy to give you a little bit of light into that. So, my background originally from Russia, immigrated to the States almost 30 years ago with my parents. We were part of this sort of post-Soviet Union academic drain of people to the States, and came here, went through school in the States, and then studied math in undergrad. Started my career in New York. Was there at Goldman Sachs for a few years, and then at Apollo, the private equity fund, before running away from the institutional private equity investing world to go to graduate school at Stanford. Really just to reflect and figure out what was next in my journey, and figuring out how I wanted to further develop myself in my career. Maybe a little bit more on the immigrant story. I mean, as an immigrant yourself, Peter, you likely can relate to some of the challenges of moving. Right, you land in a new country, many times new language, new culture, no economic safety net. Your education isn't necessarily understood or respected. Your skills aren't necessarily directly transferable. And, on top of that, the financial services industry shuts you out. And I hope to cast some more light on that. That's specifically the problem that we're finally addressing.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so let's just go into that. So what was because obviously you came over as a child, you didn't have to try and get a credit card 3 months after you landed. Where did the idea for Nova Credit come from?
Yeah, so we were working on a variety of entrepreneurship courses at Stanford Business and Engineering schools, and we're very focused on learning more about student lending and student lending experiences. So we were doing a dozen or 24 interviews every week with graduate students from around the country. And if you look at the demographics of any major graduate school, half of the student body is international, and 100% of that half will complain about this problem. How they can't get a credit card, they can't get a student loan, they can't get a cell phone plan without putting down a deposit, they can't get an apartment rental without 6 months of deposit or getting a U.S. cosigner. Right? They can't get an auto loan, they can't get their utilities turned on. It started to become increasingly clear that there was a systemic problem here that just didn't add up.
Mm-hmm. Right. So then to me, it's one thing to recognize the problem and another thing to actually create a business, because clearly this is not a simple problem you're trying to solve. And there's a reason that here we are in 2017, and this is still a problem that until you guys have come along, primarily hasn't been solved. So tell us about exactly what Nova Credit does and how did you go about starting? Imagine the challenges about where to even begin would have been pretty tough. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the immediate solution, and one that there are a few companies out in the marketplace that try to solve, is by actually providing a financial product to this demographic, right? So launching credit cards for immigrants, or launching student loans for immigrants, or auto loans that are tailored for immigrants, or co-signing products on apartments for immigrants. And, all of those services take some risk. They're great businesses. They're backed by some exceptional entrepreneurs, but they are very siloed, and they really focus on one or two financial products or verticals. And we really thought, there has to be a better way. There has to be a way to democratize access to financial services to immigrants and returning Americans from day one. And we really started by learning a lot about the international consumer reporting space. It was a relatively new industry for us, and I think in part, a combination of stubbornness and naive optimism. We sort of continued to pursue it and get more and more informed about the fact that this bureau system that exists in the U.S. between Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, and a number of smaller players exists in a very similar format around the world. Right? Bureaus now exist in nearly 200 countries. There are very few exceptions for major economies that do not have established credit infrastructure. The reporting standards are relatively similar around the world. This is very well-structured data that's being used by thousands of lending institutions in those local markets. In many cases, these are U.S. companies that have local subsidiaries that are putting billions of dollars of balance sheet at risk on the basis of this type of information. And so the thought was, well, what if we actually pull all of it together and link up these large, discrete, and growing databases into one holistic system? And that effectively is what Nova has created. We are a single endpoint that allows companies, lenders, landlords, telcos, name the use case that has a credit component to it. And we allow them through one endpoint access into consumer credit information from all around the world.
And you call that your credit passport, right? Is that the product that you're talking about there?
Yeah. So the credit passport, you can think of today as an international credit report. So just as easily as, Peter, when you came to the U.S. and got a stamp from the customs officer or the passport control on your Australian passport, people should be able to come to the U.S. and immediately gain access to financial services. So it's their financial identity that travels with them wherever they go.
Right, and that would have been wonderful to have when I arrived here in 1991. It was. I'm a big proponent because I feel the pain that your customers or the people you're working with. That it is amazing. You go from being a equivalent of an 800 FICO in your homeland to the equivalent of a 400 FICO in the place that you've moved to. So it is kind of crazy. So I just want to dig in a little bit to the credit passport. So firstly, talk about what are the countries you're working with and just break down how you're able to get this data, because I imagine this data is not. They don't just give it away. It's not easy to get. So explain how you've done that.
So the countries we have online today, we're up and running in India, in Mexico, in Canada, the UK, Australia, and we're launching in the next few months China, Korea, Brazil, Germany, and then a number of other major economies that send immigrants to the U.S. The way we've really thought about how we prioritize integration is a combination of sort of technical and data availability and immigrant volume flows into the U.S. because our primary focus is to help immigrants coming into the U.S. or returning Americans that come back here. To your question about how do we pull this off? When we first started, again, there's certainly a level of sort of naive optimism and asking for something from these international bureaus that had never been done. And the way we've pulled it off is a combination of regulatory work to understand local laws and how to navigate them and to enable this information exchange to occur, business development work to motivate these largely privately held bureaus to want to work with us, to allow them to better serve their citizens, working with their regulators to the extent necessary to bring comfort to such information exchange happening, which is ultimately within the spirit of this entire industry that supports consumer access and control over their own information. Right? A consumer ultimately owns their file, and a consumer should have a right to access and distribute that file at their own desire. And then finally, there's an incredibly complex technical element to collecting all the identification fields, integrating with various systems all around the world in real time, authenticating consumers in real time, and then actually collecting this information, parsing it, mapping it into a global dictionary, and then providing additional scoring on top of that, and then packaging all of that really neatly into a format that a U.S. lending institution or property manager can digest.
Right. So I want to just use the example. Obviously, Australia is the country I know best. I mean, and I'm curious here because the leading credit bureau in Australia, as I'm sure you know, is Veda, VEDA. They were acquired by Equifax not that long ago. So I'm curious, why doesn't Equifax do this, or do they do this? If you're going and like you're an Australian immigrant, you've just arrived in the US, you go and apply for a credit card, and the bank that you're applying to pulls an Equifax report, they should know that you are from Australia and you have this big file in Australia, but it seems like they don't. I mean, what is going on there that companies like Equifax haven't done this?
It's a great question, and one that certainly puzzled us from the beginning, because it is an obvious problem. And the irony, as you're raising, is that the big three bureaus are multinational, right? Each one has a presence in 10 to 15 countries. But I think that also presents a limitation, right? And that the solution that they can develop within their own systems is confined to their own footprint.
Right.
So, Equifax, as an example, does not exist in Mexico. Their presence in Asia is relatively light. Experian doesn't exist in Mexico or Canada. TransUnion doesn't exist in Europe. And so their ability to build a solution would only really address 20% of the problem.
Right.
It wouldn't actually develop a complete solution. And the only company well positioned to complete this, what is a Herculean effort of bringing together these global systems, is one that is independent and one that can work with all three bureaus hand in hand.
Right.
And that's the role we play, similar to acting like the Switzerland of the consumer reporting space.
Right. So companies like Equifax haven't done it simply because it just wasn't a big enough problem for them. It wasn't the market didn't, because they are not everywhere. They feel like there's just no point in developing the complex systems that would be needed to pull it off. I presume is that what you found?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the product that they can develop is a partial solution, and the addressable market from the partial solution they can create doesn't justify the cost that it would take them to develop something like what we have developed.
Right. Okay. So you've got Mexico and India, for example, obviously two very different countries. How difficult has it been to standardize all the data so it's really, so people know that they're pulling credit data that is apples to apples? Yeah,
it's a meaningful amount of work. I mean, our company is 70% engineering, and that's because there's a lot of technical infrastructure that has to be built out, and that is all being done out here in San Francisco by really an incredible team of engineers from around the country. The work involves first, understanding, breaking down and parsing the information that we receive, understanding the definitions behind the information that we receive, and then mapping it into a global format. But at its core, the information that we are receiving is very well structured, and that makes this effort possible. But we've put a lot of time up front talking to industry experts, understanding how do the global data definitions need to look so that we can truly develop a global format. And that's precisely what we've done.
Mm-hmm. So are you working then just with credit data, or are there other kinds of alternative data that is part of this, or is it purely just credit data?
So the focus today is on traditional credit data. Whether you want to refer to us as alt data is really subject to interpretation. I mean, our product offering is traditional credit data that's been repackaged in a format and made available through a new distribution channel.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And maybe to add one point on that one, Peter. So there is a vision to add additional indicators into our credit passport, right? So pulling in and supplementing the bureau information that we're receiving from India with additional information from India or additional information about this consumer in the U.S. That's something that we can certainly continue to add into this underlying credit passport. Mm-hmm. Because the goal is to prevent a global representation of this consumer and their financial identity.
Right. So then I'm curious about, you're obviously focused on the US for, the consumption of this data. So what is your business model? Is your business model very similar to the big three bureaus, where, the companies will pay to get these credit reports, or how, what is your business model exactly?
Yeah, it's very similar. So from the perspective of our customers, they go to Experian, Equifax, TransUnion for the traditional U.S. data, and they go to us for international data. So we are a consumer reporting agency subject to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. We're regulated by the CFPB. They can think we act and feel similar to traditional consumer reporting agencies. And the business model is therefore one of selling credit reports for every report that we generate.
Mm-hmm. So does that mean people are going to report back to you like they report back to the bureaus? Is that because that's how the bureaus obviously get their data, so people send it back to them. Is that the same thing that's happening with you guys?
It is, yeah. So a number of the traditional bureau model is one where, if bureaus present certain discounts to customers who report back to them. So we have a similar process where, the price is X if you want this report. If you also choose to share back with us, there are real benefits for doing so. And in addition to price being one benefit, but other benefits is that a number of customers are concerned with what's called flight risk.
Mm-hmm.
So, people come to this country and, underwriters are worried that they could then leave and walk away on their obligations. And statistically, that is a very, very low probability event, but underwriters are still very drawn to it and are always looking for solutions. And one of the areas where we can help there, and this is also what motivates data sharing with us, is in certain countries we can actually report the events back to the foreign bureau.
Right, that's what you need. That's what you need, because I actually had a person, an associate that I knew, a fellow Australian in the 90s, who was an entrepreneur, set up his business, it failed, and he just went home, and he said, I never intend to come back to America again, and he just basically left all of his debts unpaid. And obviously it's a flight risk, but that's what you need. If he knew that his data was going to be reported to the Australian bureaus, there's no way he would have done that. I don't think he would have done that in that same way. So that's really, I see as a huge piece of the puzzle for you guys.
Yeah. So I think ideologically we believe in promoting a transparent credit system. Bad actors should be penalized.
Yep. As
they move from country A to B, and good actors should be rewarded. And that's ultimately the ecosystem that Nova helps support.
Right. Okay. So I want to talk about who your customers are, because, I'm like, obviously you think of like a lending club or a Prosper or any of those guys. I mean, I don't know. Obviously there's a certain percentage of them that are going to be immigrants that are applying. But then I know there are other lenders who work like Opportune, obviously, that we've had on the show before. They work with a very large percentage of the immigrants in there for their platform. So, are you focused on platforms that focus on immigrants, or are you focused on just general lenders?
So it depends on the vertical. So today Nova operates in two primary verticals. And I mentioned there are a number of use cases where credit information is needed. And as a credit bureau, we are ultimately product agnostic. We're happy to support decisions across financial services and telecom and utilities, et cetera. So our two verticals that we focus on are first lending, and the second is property management.
Okay.
Within lending, obviously there are so many different subsets.
Yeah.
We started with some fintech customers, most of whom are focused specifically on helping serve recent immigrants and internationals. But we've also started working with a few general fintech that see this opportunity as a growth market, where they're already receiving hundreds or thousands of applications from this demographic. And what they do is they go through the regular flow. They will go ping one of their bureaus or whoever their data provider is. They'll try to receive a U.S. file. They'll find zero or very thin information, and they'll default to rejecting the person. Not because they're bad, not because the bureaus are bad, but because this information has never existed. And so by working with us, they're able to address a large and growing market that has very high credit characteristics.
Right. So you envisage a world, and obviously the more countries you get online, and the countries you mentioned earlier are obviously most of the major countries that would be, that would contain the immigrant population, particularly those that are seeking credit or, property. Because what you want to have is they pull from a regular bureau, see it's a thin file, no file, and then they pull from you guys, and they suddenly, look, they get all this rich information. I presume that is the holy grail for you guys, right? Where there's your regular bureaus, and whether you use TransUnion or whatever, they are similar in this country. So you use the domestic bureau, you use the international bureau, and that's sort of what you do for all the thin file customers. I mean, is that what you're working towards?
Yeah. So we want to be the data provider for this demographic. In fact, we are effectively the only provider that exists today. As we've spent some time talking already, this is a very difficult puzzle to solve. It requires global coordination and a lot of heavy technical build out.
Yeah.
But what we want every financial institution in the country to be able to do is to pull credit information on any consumer. So if you're a U.S. consumer, your best source of information will be one of the U.S. bureaus. If you don't have a U.S. file, but you have international information about you, then you should be able to access that information through Nova.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So, as I mentioned in the introduction, that you guys won the Pitch It contest earlier this year in New York at Lend It, and I actually went back and watched your pitch again just yesterday, just in preparation for this call. And I'm curious about what it's now we're almost 6 months removed. It's hard to believe we're 6 months removed from Lend It USA 2017. What have you tell us about the progress you've made in the last 6 months?
Yeah, it's crazy how fast time flies. I mean, we are incredibly busy, right? It's the nature of the stage that we are in, and having found product market fit and continuing to build the business that we're building. Our team is at capacity, and I think that the progress in the last few months is really focused on continuing to add international vendors and add customers, and further build out and improve our product. Mm-hmm. So, you and I last overlapped in China. China is a huge market for us for many reasons, and one that we're very focused on having a solution for the millions of Chinese immigrants who come to the U.S. Mm-hmm. So the supply side of our equation has been really an area of focus. I think on the customer side, we've really built out the property management vertical in the last 6 months. We've had some really exciting customers onboarded who are noteworthy and scalable, and really can act like incredible referenceable customers for us. On the product side, we've made huge investments in information security and compliance to be able to work with the types of institutions that ultimately are in the most need for this solution, as well as further building out the flexibility and the ease of onboarding and integrating our solution.
Right. So can you give us a sense of, I didn't actually ask you when you founded Nova, and can you also tell us that and when you got your first paying customer on board? And then maybe tell us a little bit about the scale you're at, maybe the size of your team. Just tell us a little bit about sort of that journey into viability, shall we say?
Yeah, it's been quite the ride. So
sure.
the idea formation really took off a couple of years ago now in 2015, where the problem statement became very clear, and it took us over a year to go from what we thought would be the solution to first revenue. So a bit about our history. We came out of the Stanford graduate program in 2016. Immediately enrolled in Y Combinator, went through that program, and subsequently raised our financing, grew our team, and a few months later, early part of this year, we turned on our first set of customers. That's really been an exciting validation point in that the systems work, the information can be accessed instantly, as easily as you access traditional US information, and it's scalable. It's something that is working every day. I wake up and we have credit requests coming in overnight, and that's a really exciting stage of the business to be in.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So, and then who has backed you? Obviously, you went through Y Combinator, and I know you haven't raised tens of millions of dollars. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been eligible to do Pitch It. So, can you tell us any sense about who's backing you and your fundraising kind of strategy?
Yeah, so we're backed by a number of incredible investors from East Coast, West Coast, and internationally. To name a few, First Round Capital is really a seed stage focused fund out here, has been an incredible partner to us. Index Ventures, who you may know, is one of the leading investors in Europe and here as well, have been fantastic. And we also have a few fintech specialized funds, including NICA and Core as investors, as well as an incredible group of angels from all parts of the financial services sector. Fintech, traditional finance, U.S., international, and we're incredibly fortunate to be backed by such a broad and passionate group of people who believe in the mission of what we're after. I mean, it's certainly a big and ambitious vision, and one that we always need the help and support of people from around the world to pull off.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. So then tell us what lies ahead for you guys. I mean, what's on your roadmap for the next 6 or 12 months?
It's continuing to scale. Adding additional countries is a huge effort. There are 200 plus countries out there, and we want to figure out a way to help as many of them as we can. There are immigrants coming from every one of those countries to the U.S., and particularly countries where there are huge refugee crises going on at the moment. We are very focused on figuring out ways to develop solutions there as well. So I think that the focus for the next 6 to 12 months is further build out the supply side. So our data vendors continuing to build out the product and the ease of integration, and continuing to add more depth into how far we've penetrated into the lending and property management verticals.
Right.
There's a very clear direction for our business because the problem is very clear.
Sure.
And the solution that we're taking is one that we have conviction around continuing to pursue.
Right. And so, and we're almost out of time, but I just want to ask one more question, because it strikes me as you're talking. I mean, you obviously are an international company, and you're focusing right now on the American consumer. Clearly, there's the same problem that happens in Canada. I know that in Australia and many other UK, throughout Europe. Is your focus going to be just on the US, or do you feel like long term you can really be a truly international company where it goes the other way? It goes, you have all this information, and you can be in 20 countries around the world doing the same thing that you're doing here in the US.
It's a great question. We were international before we were national.
Right.
By virtue of our business model, we've had to build international relationships before we had a product, because it is through those international relationships that we have developed a product. By virtue of our size, we've had to really focus on the U.S. to start, and it is the largest immigrant market in the world. But it's a matter of time before we launch in the UK, in Australia, in London, in the Middle East, in Japan, in markets that receive millions or hundreds of thousands of immigrants, expats, or returning citizens. As the global gateway for consumer credit information exchange, we have a duty to help and support immigrants in those markets, and we're moving as fast as we can to further unlock those gateways in a manner that is scalable and regulatory compliant.
Okay, well, I wish you all the best, Misha. It's really been fascinating hearing about your company, and good luck to you.
The pleasure is mine, Peter. Really appreciate you taking the time, and please do stay in touch.
Okay, sounds good. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye. As I touched on briefly on the show, this is something that is personal for me. I first came to this country in 1991, and I came from Australia. I had no credit footprint here whatsoever. Tried to apply for a credit card, got rejected. Tried to apply for a store, like a store credit card, got rejected. Luckily, I did have an American Express card, which was in Australian dollars that I would spend in American dollars, pay for it paid off in Australian dollars. So that helped me get by. But it took me, I think it was 8 or 9 months to actually get a $500 credit limit card. It shouldn't have been that hard. You could be a billionaire in Australia. You come over here and you try and apply for a credit card, and you're going to probably get rejected if you have no credit footprint in this country. That's insane in 2017. So I fully support the mission that Nova Credit is undertaking. It should have been resolved, a decade or two ago. It hasn't. So I feel like Nova Credit are doing a great job in solving what is a problem. It's a huge issue. If you're an American, you don't feel it. But if you're an immigrant here, it's a huge issue, and one that it's very frustrating when you keep getting rejected. And I wish them all the best, as I said, and I think they have a mission that is truly honourable, and one that I see that will really improve the lives of many, many people. Anyway, on that note, I will sign off. I very much appreciate you listening, and I'll catch you next time. Bye. Today's podcast was sponsored by Fundrise. Fundrise is the first private market real estate investment platform available to everyone, that is, accredited and non-accredited investors. I've been investing myself since 2015, and we had the CEO of Fundrise, Ben Miller, on the podcast back in episode 110. You can begin with as little as $500. Go to www.fundrise.com/lendacademy to find out more.